In the midst of the COVID crisis, humanity's other issues continue unabated. War and strife hasn't paused despite the entreaties from the UN Secretary General. Terror continues. Murders and shootings are actually up in some American cities despite lockdowns. And those stay-at-home orders are thought to have caused incidents of domestic violence to spike. It's all enough to make us fear for the present and future of humanity. That's why I want to hear from Rutger Bergman. He is the author of Humankind, A Hopeful History. Pleasure to have you on, Rutger. Let me begin by asking you to explain what you sort of are arguing against in this book, which is what you call the thin veneer of civilization theory. Explain
Yes.
what that is and why it's wrong.
So this is a really old idea in Western culture, which says that our civilization is only a thin veneer, and that when there's some small change in our circumstances or when we're in the midst of a crisis, that we reveal our true selves, that we start looting and plundering, and we really show that we're these savages deep down. Now, that idea goes back all the way to the ancient Greeks. You find it within Orthodox Christianity, the notion that we're all sinners. You find it with the Enlightenment philosophers. I think it's at the heart of our capitalist system, the notion that people are just selfish. And I think it's fundamentally wrong.
So what is the strongest evidence you have that it's fundamentally wrong?
So we can first look at what happens after natural disasters. So one case study that I look at in my book is what happened in 2005 after Katrina, after New Orleans was flooded. And we all still remember, what was in the press back then. Again, the stories of murders and rapes and looting and plundering. But we actually know from sociology that what really happens also after Katrina, but every single time after an earthquake or a tsunami, is that people pull together from the left to the right, rich, poor, young, old. We now have more than 700 case studies from sociologists that prove this over and over again. So I advise people to look maybe a little bit less of the news, because that often makes you cynical, and zoom out a little bit and look what science is telling us.
The iconic explanation for this idea of the thin veneer of civilization is, of course, the Lord of the Flies. This idea of these young kids, young boys abandoned on an island, and it turns into a pretty savage, all against all. They band into groups. You have something interesting to say about a real-life version of the Lord of the Flies.
Yes, I remember reading Lord of the Flies when I was 16 or 17 years old, and I remember feeling quite depressed. It was only while I was researching this book that I wondered, has it ever happened? Can I find one case in all of world history where real kids shipwrecked on a real island, and what would actually happen? Turns out that, yes, it did happen. A long time ago, 50 years ago, in 1966, there were these 6 kids from Tonga, which is an island group in the Pacific Ocean. They were students of a boarding school, an Anglican boarding school in the capital there. They were bored with school. They said, you know what, we're going to go on an adventure. We're going to steal a boat. And they ended up in a storm, drifted for 8 days, shipwrecked on this island, and survived for 15 months. And I managed to track them down, actually. And it turns out they're still the best of friends today, because that's how they survived, by staying friends. So the real Lord of the Flies is in every single way the opposite of the fictional Lord of the Flies. It's a story of human resilience and of friendship and of hope.
You do have World War II, the Nazis, Auschwitz, World War I, the barbarity of ISIS, of Al-Qaeda, the Cambodian, Pol Pot experience.
The list is very long.
How do you square all that with your cheerful history of human beings' essential goodness?
I wouldn't say that I'm arguing that people are naturally good. I think that we've evolved to be friendly, which is something different. This is literally what biologists are arguing these days. They talk about survival of the friendliest, which means that for millennia, it was actually the friendliest among us who had the most kids, and so had the biggest chance of passing on their genes to the next generation. But it's important to emphasize that there's a real dark side to this friendliness. If you look at history, so often we do the most horrible things in the name of comradeship and of loyalty, and because we don't want to let down our own group. So I arrive at a quite paradoxical view of human nature, I think, where on the one hand, yes, we are built to connect, we've been shaped by evolution to work together, but yeah, cooperation sometimes always also leads to really horrible things.
So I want to connect this to the present, and I think it connects in a very powerful way. The debates about defunding the police fundamentally get at this idea that, do we have to approach, something like policing in this very fearful attitude that says human beings are very nasty. If we let up even slightly, all hell will break loose? Or are we actually doing the opposite? Are we assuming too much nastiness, and we could take our foot off the accelerator or the brake, depending on how you make the metaphor work?
I think that what you assume in other people is what you get out of them. So if you assume that people deep down are just selfish and savages, then you're going to design all your institutions around that, your schools and your workplaces and the way your police will operate, and you'll create a lot of bad things. But if you turn it around, also in policing, I think you can move to a very different kind of society. In the book, I look at the criminal justice system that they have in Norway, which is in almost every single way the opposite of what the US has. So on the one hand, they have very powerful community policing, where the police officer is a kind of a social worker that really tries to establish trust in the community. And then the prisons, well, they are like these very strange, almost like holiday resorts where inmates get treated with kindness. And they socialize with the guards. They have the freedom to make music. They have their own music studio and their own music label, which is called Criminal Records. And then, I first learned about this and I thought, this is crazy. This is nuts. These Norwegians, they've lost it. But then you look at the evidence. You look at the recidivism rate, for example, the chance that someone will come out of crime once he or she gets out of prison. And it's nowhere as low as in Norway, while it's really high in the US. So I think that the US could learn quite a bit from other countries here.
All right. Well, you've given us a lot to think about and certainly a lot to hope for. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And we will be back in a moment. My book of the week is Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bergman, whom we had on. This is one of those books that tries to make you see the world and all of history in a different light, and it mostly succeeds. Whether you agree with it or find yourself arguing with it, you will see that it has a bigger impact on you than most books you will read this year.